Hi there, welcome to another episode of the Bonsai Stuff podcast. I'm Scott Martin from Bonsai Matsu, and as always, thank you very much for listening in. I want to, as we're getting close to wrapping up 2024, Christmas is just around the corner, end of the year. It's getting warmer for us in the Southern Hemisphere, and in Melbourne it's getting ridiculously hot to cold, to hot, to wet. It's various weather at the moment that we're sort of riding the waves of. But it's one of those things, as I've said before, you've got to be prepared for. And I try to have a list of pre-Christmas jobs that I go through. Stuff I try and make sure is done with a deadline in mind, being obviously Christmas Day. I like to have everything looking nice as I possibly can anyway. And I want to run through that pre-Christmas jobs checklist, I suppose, to see if I can give anyone that's listening a bit of a heads up and maybe see if I can help a little bit with jobs around your yard. And also want to talk about sacrifice branches in this one. And I have talked about sacrifice branches before, but having been through a lot of decandling recently, I want to just talk about what I suppose my approach has been recently when I've looked at a few of my trees and thought it'd be easy to cut that off and decandle it and make it look pretty, but is there a step forward I can take with these trees? Is there something different that I can do that will make a massive difference to these trees by just, for now, doing nothing or being selective about what I do? So I'll run through those couple of things in this podcast. Grab yourself a cuppa. Let's get into it. Well, Santa's almost here. That means for me, I've got a heap of things that I need to get off my list. I've got my pre-Christmas jobs list that I try and take care of successfully every year. So it just means that I'm ahead of things, or exactly where I need to be, I suppose, heading into a holiday period. And this obviously applies to me in Melbourne, Victoria. If you're in the Northern Hemisphere, then I apologise. It's getting quite cold for you. But if you're down south, it's actually really nice. Wearing shorts every day, barely wearing shoes around the yard. It's actually very enjoyable. So one of the first things that I do on my list of jobs to make sure I get done before Christmas is a pest inspection. It's amazing how with the warmer weather and a little bit of humidity, how things start to take off. One of my telltales, I suppose, is that there's lots of pests around the yard, is when I see lots of spider webs, not just on the trees, but also around the house or around the yard or hanging off trees, garden trees. So I try and make sure that I'm a bit more vigilant this time of year, checking for them and looking for caterpillars. Like I said a while ago, we've had so many little moths and butterflies around the yard that there has to be an impact with that in regard to the caterpillars, and there is. I can see definitely where some needles have been pulled together. When I was decandling, I saw it on a few trees. A lot of customers' trees that I've worked on, I've seen caterpillars in there. I've seen chewed leaves on my own trees. There's little cocoons being made where they're dragging foliage back in together, and it's something that I just need to be on the front foot with. So however you're going to manage the pests, I reckon it's a really good time to get out there and get active with it. Generally, you've got a bit more time up your sleeve at the moment as well as we get towards the end of the working period, and hopefully you get a couple of days off at least between that Christmas and New Year period, and it just allows you to get up close and personal with the trees again. And hopefully there's not a hell of a lot to do, although looking at my list in front of me that I'm going to run through, there is a lot to do from in my yard, but hopefully you get to actually spend some time analysing and looking at your trees. And with the next episode of the podcast coming out, our last one for 2024 coming out next week, I'm going to do the yearly wrap up with planning and that sort of stuff. So I'll talk about that a little bit next week. But the pest issue is one that I'm definitely on top of at the moment. The other thing is, as I look around my yard, I see my deciduous have just gone nuts again. Like, it's just the amount of pruning that you've got to do on some of the deciduous, especially for me, it feels like my trident maples and Japanese maples just have not stopped growing at all since the start of spring. They just keep pushing. I keep cutting, I keep pushing. And some of this newer growth that comes out post that first cut, it's not as, how do I say it, not as pleasant as the earlier growth. The internode, that first internode, generally tends to be really quite long and coarse as the tree really pushes to get a lot of extension on its growth, which is great if it's a sacrifice branch, but if it's a finer part around the top of the tree, or even if you're just developing the structure or ramification, often that big long first internode is useless. So I'm finding that in most cases, not all, but most cases, I'm removing that new growth completely because it's destroying things, and it's so aggressive, the growth, that it can get quite thick quite fast, which means, extension means thickening, and it can destroy that finer, more delicate structure that I have around the apex of the tree. So I'm definitely going through the trees at the moment, giving them a good haircut, the deciduous. And tools down, I've finished decandling for the year. Another year done, another one bites the dust, and it was actually really, really pleasant this year. Done a lot of intensives and a lot of classes and a lot of workshops on black pines. A lot of people very interested in it, which is fantastic, because if I can have one little part to play in people appreciating their Japanese black pines or red pines, then I'm very happy with what I've done. And to see the trees coming back year on year. Some people are fresh into the workshop, and I look at their trees and we go through the plan, and maybe it's not decandling, maybe it's allowing things to continue to grow so we get more needle mass, which means more back budding, and we go through that part of the plan. And then I see people that are maybe on their second year, and they've done that last year, and this year we're actually looking at decandling, and there's a lot more growth, and the comparison of photos that seems to happen a lot in the workshop is brilliant. Because the people that maybe come in for the first time, they're sort of like, right, really? I've got to wait, I've got to do this, got to do that. Someone else says, hey, look at this. This was my tree last year. It looked very similar to yours. Long and spindly, not much happening on it. Followed the plan, the process. Did what I was expected to do with repotting, with fertilizing, all the stuff, leaving it alone for now, not doing too much with it. And look at it now. It's like a completely different tree. And that part I really love, that they do respond. They do bounce back really well. But for me, having done all the hard work in the autumn-winter period with needle plucking, there was just decandling to do this time. There wasn't much of anything else other than checking for wires that are cutting in, removing some old wire on the trees, which is quite normal. Only in spots where it's cutting in, I'll leave the rest of the wire on there. But going through and just decandling, just basically removing that new growth, except where I wanted to do a bit more development, hence the next section of the podcast where I want to talk about sacrifice branches. It's a really great opportunity to harness the tree's strength and resources and really make a change. But anyway, I had to make sure that I got my hand massages in after all that bloody holding of the tweezers and the scissors and cramping up after sitting there and decandling for hours and hours and hours on end. But anyway, it's done. Like I said, tools down. I'm finished. I'm very happy with where the trees are at, and I was pleasantly surprised at the strength, which is really nice. Nice to see there at the point in the game where I know they're going to respond really well, and even sort of 2-3 weeks later after decandling, I'm looking at some of the earlier trees that I did, some of my larger pines, and I'm now starting to see the buds forming around the base of the candle cut, which is awesome. It's a relief. I've been through it. I don't know how many years I've done decandling for, and I give advice to people saying, when you decandle, don't go out there every day and look for the new buds, because it's the most disappointing time of your life while you're thinking you've destroyed your tree. You've cut off all this beautiful new foliage and you're waiting. It's like watching a kettle boil. It just never happens. It just seems to take forever. So I fell into my own trap where I didn't follow my own advice, and I would be out looking at this tree. I say it all the time, but one of my favourite pines that I've got, this big bugger, and looking at it, looking all over the different cuts. Oh, there's no buds yet. There's no buds. And then got busy, distracted, finished doing decandling, then went back and looked at it just the other day. I went, there we are. They've started to form. The buds are all forming, and I look around the tree, and yep, that's perfect. So it's very much a relief. It's like when you come out of the winter dormancy and you're looking at your deciduous, waiting for them to pop bud and thinking, please don't have died. It was the same feeling once you decandled to see what's going to happen with the tree and what's the next step that's going to happen. Is what I've done to this tree the right thing, or have I just set this poor bloody thing back even further? Anyway, decandling's done. Next thing I've got on my list is weeding. Seriously, weeding drives me insane. It feels like I just get to cleaning up a pot, put it back on the bench, and I look at the tree beside it, and there's weeds growing there. And it's just that never-ending cycle of weeding. But I do, like I said, I do have it on my list that I make sure that by the time I get to Christmas, I can walk around my yard and go, that looks good. Good job, and give the trees a bit of a break. Make sure that nothing's there taking up the water that I'm putting on them. Nothing's stealing any nutrients that are floating around in the pot. It's just, they're unsightly weeds. And if you've got, Christmas is a time for people to be with other people. So I try and make it that my trees look at a certain point. So if I do have people come around and look at them, they're not looking at them going, geez, look at all those weeds in the pot. That looks very unsightly. It's like, I think about it like mowing your lawns before you have family come over. Always make the place look nice if you can, and don't get caught out with these filthy looking weeds. So I do have it on my list, and I do give you a little bit of insight. I do use a little flame, a little torch on the trees. Give them good water. Once I've weeded, give them a good water. Make sure that the trunks and foliage is nice and wet, and then go around with my little blowtorch, tiny little one, not a big one, and just give the weeds a bit of what for, just to try and remove them as much as I can. Be very careful doing it. Be careful of foliage; you will burn, and if you get near the trunk, then you will do damage to the trunk. So don't always do it, but I find that's, for me, one, it's very satisfying to get rid of weeds with a little flame, but it's very effective on trying to burn the roots out of the weeds as well. And it's a quick, intense flash over with the fire, and it doesn't do any damage to the trees. So, like I said, I do make sure that I've watered well before I do it. The other thing that I do at this time of the year is make sure that, my watering system is correct. It's that time of the year where watering systems become far more of a focus for a lot of people. Had some bloody great message come through. Fellow Graham, I know he listens to the podcast. He had a lovely trip away for a very long period of time, and we'd worked together on a system, and he'd installed this thing perfectly, and he's had a great holiday. He's lived life to its fullest. He's experienced Japan and everything that Japan's got to offer, and he could sleep easy at night because he had a fantastic system which he'd put the time into. He'd really done the hard yards to make sure that it was correct. And for me, because a lot of the watering system components are plastic and they're exposed to the Australian elements, I always make sure that I look for fatigue on things, look for cracks in stems of risers, look for maybe something that's not flowing correctly, and just spend the time, I spend the time now pre-Christmas just walking around, maybe replacing a few of the sprayer heads that might be on the older side, just to be safe, just to be sure. Doesn't mean I'm guaranteed things are going to be okay, but I definitely have done lots of testing and lots of upgrades, and that fatigue checking of the watering system is super important. It's something which I do find happens quite regularly, especially with some of these crappy bits of plastic that we use for the system. So it is refreshing to know that I'm sort of on top of that whenever I go around and look at the watering system. And linked with the watering system, for me, one of the most important components is the camera network, the camera systems, to check on your trees, to check that the watering system's working as it's expected. So massive upgrade there for me as well. It feels like I'm on Big Brother. I've got so many bloody cameras around the joint, but it means that I can really, I always look for weakness. I always look for an area of improvement that I can make anywhere with my bonsai that I do, anything at all. And for me, there was a few black spots where I couldn't always check. I could see roughly around that area, but now I feel like I'm taking another step forward. Who knows? You're probably listening to the episode in 2025, the same time of the year, where I talk about more cameras being added to the system as well. But anyway, for now, I feel like I'm on top of things, and I've done as much as I can. Next thing on my list is wire cutting. I'm doing a lot of checking for that at the moment with the growing period that we've had. Like I said, on a lot of trees that I have, I don't mind a little bit of cutting because I know that scarring is going to help hold whatever it is in place, be it trunk, branches, whatever. So I don't mind having a little bit of cutting, but I'm positive that I don't want it to swallow the wire. So I spend a lot of time at the moment when I can get up close to the trees, looking at that wire and looking for swelling, and look at wire removal. So wire removal is definitely on the list. One of the most important things that's on my list is to look for the weak or the vulnerable. Any of my trees that I think aren't performing or don't look as well as what they should, rather than putting it through an extremely stressful period, be it summer in Australia, I look to protect them as much as I possibly can. How can I look after that tree to get it back to better health? And for whatever reason it is, normally it's repotting hasn't been done properly or soon enough. So I go into protection mode for any of my trees. Any that I see maybe there's a branch died back, or there's some yellowing of foliage, maybe they're staying a little bit too wet. Is there something that I need to manage with this tree? Then I look at those weak and the vulnerable, and I put them into a special care area where I go, okay, so now I can really monitor and measure. Do you need a little bit less water? Do you need a little bit more water? Do I need to aerate the soil for you? What do I need to do to help you become a better, stronger bonsai? And I do it now because I know if I did it at the end of summer, if I wait until February to start looking at doing this sort of thing, then it's way too late. The game's over. So I try and stay on the front foot with that. Removing fertilizer, I'm sort of 50-50 on this. All right. I'm not that I don't think I'm leaving my fertilizer tea bags on there to feed my trees, because I'm definitely not. I'm not feeding something going into the summer period, because that new foliage that grows gets cooked. It's very, very weak. It's very soft, and it cannot stand the exposure to the heat and the sun. So I'm not looking at fertilizing my trees. What I'm talking about is removing of the fertilizer bags. As I've done my decandling, yep, definitely, I've cleaned it off the trees. But other trees that I have around the yard, I actually find that as we get into this really hot, dry period, and there's lots of bushfire warnings floating around Victoria for this summer, so I know it's going to be hot and it's going to be dry. I look to keep the tea bags on certain trees that maybe need a little bit more moisture, because the tea bags help hold that water in there. They're an additional source of moisture and prevention of that evaporation of the soil, of the water from the soil mix. So I do leave them on there knowing that they're completely exhausted. They've got nothing left in the tank to help promote and grow new foliage. There's no nitrogen left. They're completely cooked, these things. They're just like, they're for want of a better description, just like a tea bag, a wet towel that's sitting in certain spots around the pot, that as I water, I know that that's absorbing water and it's keeping the moisture into the pot. So I do remove the fertilizer where I think there's a chance that the tree's still growing, or I see these deciduous that are still pushing out this massive amount of foliage. But when they've calmed down and they've slowed down, I leave the tea bags on there because it helps hold a bit more moisture in the pots. That said, I'm also feeding my natives at the moment because it's a really good growing period for them. So it's the last thing on my list of things that I want to make sure I get done pre-Christmas, is to give my natives a good feed. Just make sure that I'm topping them up, making sure that they're not getting exhausted from all this growth that they're pushing out. They're a lot of work, the Australian natives, but they're worth it. They're great. So yeah, the final thing on the list for pre-Christmas is to make sure that I've given some fertilizer or some feed to my Australian natives. So as you heard, it's I don't know. I always think spring's a busy time because you're chasing your tail flat out. But I think that this early part of summer is definitely really, really busy as well. Like next couple of months, January, it quietens down because it gets so hot that nothing grows. They go into that summer dormancy, which is lovely. I do like that. I do like that downtime. But it's a busy time, this first part, where you've got, definitely in Melbourne, maybe some of the other capitals, Adelaide and Perth, you've definitely been a lot hotter and a lot drier for a lot longer than what we have. So you may already be in that dormancy period for your non-natives. And up in Brisbane, you've had a bucket load of rain up there too. So, of course, it depends on where you are around the country as to what's happening. But for us in Melbourne, that hot, that cold, and rain coming, everything seems to be growing still. And just look at my lawns; they seem to grow within the blink of an eye. They just drive me insane. But anyway, with all that growth comes a real opportunity when it comes to sacrifice branches. And I seriously love sacrifice branches. I get asked a lot about ground growing in large containers and growing in bonsai pots. Like, what's the best? What do you like to do? And I love the fact that when I put a tree into a bonsai pot, I don't follow the approach that it has to be a masterpiece before it goes in a bonsai pot. It's just a container. It's just a container where you get to control or manage with precision the root system that the tree is going to grow. So my preference is to get it to that point where you are managing that root system and you are building a solid foundation for your tree as quickly as possible. And if that means going into a bonsai pot or a black pot that simulates a bonsai container, then I'd do it as soon as you possibly can. And I'm not going to talk anymore about bonsai roots. If you want to hear me talk about anything to do with the root system on a bonsai, just go back to the last 6 years of every episode of this podcast, and you'll know that it's a primary focus of mine. Anyway, when it comes to sacrifice branches, I love growing them in containers, and I've proven to people that I've got trees. There's one that comes to mind that was a little black pine. It's only, I've got my hands shaping up in front of the microphone. It's 30, 40 centimeters tall, something like that. And the sacrifice branch got grown for about 6 or 7 years, I think I counted on it. And it was massive. It was, sort of diameter of maybe 8 to 10 centimeters, something like that. And the tree had grown beautifully. Like it improved the taper issue that was with the tree. And it's allowed me to really chunk up the base of the tree. It was positioned perfectly around the back of the trunk. So as this thing gets removed, yeah, sure, there's going to be a scar or a gin, but it's not going to be an issue. I'd rather do that and make sure that this tree develops the way that I want it to develop, so it becomes magnificent, than just leave it as is. So it doesn't need to be in the ground to grow a sacrifice branch. And a lot of my bonsai, I'll grow them at different times because there's a great purpose for strength improvement. You can use a sacrifice branch to really boost up the tree's strength and resources. You can use it for improving taper on individual branches. You can use it for improving taper on the trunk. And as I was going through decandling, and I know this may be coming out a bit too late for people in Melbourne, but I know friends up in the northern parts of Australia around the Sunshine Coast and Gold Coast, decandling is one of those things that may be just sort of happening, kicking off, or may have just kicked off about now because of the growing season that you guys have. Sacrifice branches on a lot of my black pines, I looked at them all as it was one of my primary focuses when I was decandling, rather than just getting into AutoZone going, right, just cut everything off. First thing I do is health assessment, tree strong enough, yep, tick that box, it's strong enough, definitely strong enough, needs to be decandled. All right. So look at the tree, go back to the trunk, go back to the first stage of development. Could it be improved? Could you do something with this bonsai to make it better? And sometimes it would be like, no, this is really good. I'm really happy with how this looks now, so I'm going to leave it. And other times, which was vast majority this time, I'd look at it and go, actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just have one of these buds continue to grow. Maybe it's off, a sub branch near the base of a primary branch that's coming off. So as it gets longer, it gets thicker. It's not really going to do too much damage to that primary branch. You know what? I'm going to let that sacrifice run, because I think that whether it's 1 year, whether it's another season, maybe I'll remove it in autumn winter when I have a look at the trees up close and personal and get in there and bud select and needle pluck. Maybe that's the point where I go, no, that's fine, 6 months, let's get rid of this thing. Other times it might be, this is doing a great job, like this example I talked about for 6-7 years. Maybe it'll be one of those ones where I go, you know what, you're not done. I thought you were done, but you're not. I really want to look at improving this even further. And I don't know, for me, I'm a planner. I find it very satisfying when you see things evolve. I mean, no rush. So I've got the perfect environment where I've got a mix of trees that are at different stages. That if I want to look at a tree that's as close to finished as I think it will get, I've got that. But if I want to look at things develop and change and have a bit more strategy involved with that development, the development of that tree, then I can do that as well. And like I said, I can really look at boosting the strength of the trees. And for me, it was a lot of the focus for me was on the really, really small stuff, like the last batch of trees that if you saw my story where I had like a whole bench of these tiny little ones stacked up, ready to go to get decandled. A lot of those trees specifically had a candle left. Often it's the lowest, strongest candle. I didn't leave them around the apex of those trees. It was my focus was can I make the base of this tree from about halfway up a bit meatier? Can I really add some oomph to it? Build the bark on it, really take it to that next level. And so a lot of those little ones had the strongest, lowest candle, not lowest, but about midway point candle left in the best position possible to avoid scarring and destruction of the structure that's in there. Because I'm really happy with the trees, and for years I've been working on just refining. Just decandle. Comes around autumn, winter, go through bud select again, cut them back, make sure they're nice and compact, check the wires, rewire them, make them look great, and then decandle when summer came around. That was the process for years and years and years. But this year it was just like, oh, geez, I wonder if I could improve that a little bit further. And like I said, because they're smaller trees, I don't know whether it's just going to be 6 months, it's going to be 12 months, whether it's going to be a couple of years, what it's going to be with these trees. And I'm really interested to see where they get to. Another thing with the sacrifice branches, you've got to be very. There's an asterisk beside this one. You've got to be very careful that the trees don't get too strong with the sacrifice branch and start funneling too many resources to that sacrifice branch at the expense of the rest of the tree. That earlier example with the 6 to 7 year old sacrifice branch, that sacrifice branch was cut back as part of a demonstration for a bonsai club earlier this year, around June, I think it was, middle of the year. And the reason for that was that the rest of the tree, the growth that had come post decandling last year was pretty weak, pretty insipid, and pretty. I was a bit disappointed with it, thinking, oh, maybe the sacrifice branch now has drawn too many resources. It's probably time that I get in there and reduce that and push some strength back into the main tree. So I did that, and the growth that came in spring was insane. Decandling that tree this year was just beautiful. It's like it's worked. Like all the resources are pushed back from the sacrifice branch back into the tree. Everything's bounced back to life again, and I'm back on the decandling trail. Whereas if I hadn't, I think I would have had some dead branches, but I definitely wouldn't have been decandling. You look at the new spring candles and you see the green stem before it gets to the needles being 5-6 centimeters across the entire tree. It's like, yeah, you've bounced back. You've done really, really well. And on the sacrifice branch itself too, just to give you a final picture on where that's at, I'd shortened it to maybe 30 centimeters. It was, a metre and a half long or whatever. It was huge. But I cut it back to like 30 centimeters, back to some buds. Some of those buds have started to push off. So I'm going to rerun the sacrifice branch again because, I've got a massive scar that's going to be there anyway around the back of the tree. I might as well just push it and see how good I can make this tree. And it's taper. So, you've got to watch those sacrifice branches that you don't funnel everything into them at the expense of the tree. But like I said, for these little ones with not decandling certain areas, I don't know, 6 months might be enough. A year might be enough. 2 years might be not enough. Who knows? Let's just see where it gets to. But sacrifice branches now, when you're looking at this pre-Christmas prune of any of your trees, it's a nice thing to maybe keep in the back of your mind that you can use it. Righto, that's a wrap. Episode 50 for season 6. Insane. I love it. I love this podcast. I love you guys. I love everyone that listens. And I love that together as a bonsai community, bonsai world, all of our trees are getting stronger, better, and we're developing them with a true intent, a design plan in mind, and you're focusing on the right stuff. You're pushing the tree's strength and health, and by doing that, it's making your bonsai journey, your bonsai path, even more enjoyable for you. So it's an absolute win-win, and it's a win for me too because I love it. I love the fact that we're all getting better and stronger, and that any snippet of help that I can provide, as I don't profess to be the be all and end all when it comes to your bonsai journey, but if I can just be a 1 or 2% improvement on what you do, and I make you smile when you're around your trees, then that's all I have to do. So Merry Christmas, everybody. This is it. We're wrapping up for Christmas. There'll be yet another episode coming out prior to the new year, so don't worry. You'll still get to hear my dulcet tones before 2024 is over and done with. But have a great Christmas. Please enjoy the time with your trees. Make sure if you're down south that you've got your watering sorted out. Just make them your primary focus, even though it's easy to get distracted this time of the year. You just can't. It's a really important time to spend with your trees and your nearest and dearest and your loved. If you're up north, then hopefully you've protected them from the bitter cold weather that you're facing up there. So anyway, as I say, always make sure that you give them a cuddle for me, spend time with them, and show them the love. At this time of the year, make sure they get a Christmas present of your time, and that you can take them to that next level and get ready for what's going to happen next year, eh? Until next time, Merry Christmas, and I will see you on the other side. Happy bonsai.